This is the first formal attempt to create the pitch for New Logistics Search. Okay, New Logistics Search is a company, I suppose, but more or less it's an approach. And what is happening is that I believe we are now at a position in, let's call it a position. We're in a place in human behavior where this is now important. Okay, so New Logistics Search. Okie dokie. This is kind of like, what happens is that there is, in fact, a website for this, but this is also going to be part of what can be called a YouTube channel. Is that Chanel? Does channel have two or one? Two. Oop. Channel. So, we have a channel. This is how this is beginning. This is the beginning of the YouTube channel. This video will probably be discarded and replaced with another one. And but we're covering the basics. New Logistics Search, which is a channel. The channel is connected to a website, which has the same name, and a crowdfunding presence. And by crowdfunding presence, what I mean is a sort of like a magazine in a crowdfunding venue about crowdfunding or about this situation. The actual product, I have one product so far, which is an oil cleanup machine, for which I have to get a provisional patent and then move forward with. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless to do that. But that's a product. One, we'll just call that product. Okay, now, New Logistics Search has this construction for being part of people's lives. The other thing that's going on here, though, is a Craigslist comic or Craigslist presence, which is happening. People can find this either through Craigslist, which some people would think is stupid, but Craigslist can be in like Seattle and New York and Paris and Tokyo, okay? And then what can happen with that is that people can find it. That's one way of beginning this relationship that needs to start somewhere. This kind of goes in the level of engineers. People who are, I say engineers because basically engineers are people who understand how things are put together. Now, what is happening is I'm dealing with what could be called inevitable topics of interest. Okay? Inevitable topics of interest, the issue here being is that they are inevitable. Now, what we have is, this has a relationship with what could be called the mobile device. And the mobile device has a relationship with the internet which then pulls us to my construction. This takes care, this is sort of my little construction. We'll call this the little construction. This is Dave's little construction. This process here, I don't have to exist or any of that for this to basically just play itself out. This is ongoing. Why is new important here? The reason that new is important here is because what we have is we'll call this the North Pole. We'll call this Hudson Bay. We'll call this the Great Lakes. We'll call this the Northeast. We'll call this permafrost. And beneath it, methane. We'll call this ice melting. And we'll call this water. And its directions. Now, this area, we'll call this Ontario. Now, what's happening here is this is all of this has nothing to do with human technology any longer. Nothing that we do now is going to change the inevitable. The inevitable is that the ice is melting, the water is going to start flowing into these areas, the permafrost is decaying, the methane is going to start coming out of here, and this region between Hudson Bay and the Great Lakes is built the way that it is. This is very narrow, okay? In terms of human behavior, we have a great deal of industrialization. So we could say industrialization, which is a human behavior issue, exists here. Now, inevitable topics of interest. This, I suppose, you would find interesting if you were living in this area of the world. Okay, you would begin having what are called conversations about these inevitable topics of interest. Now, the part that's interesting here is that something's happening with what could be called Moore's Law, which is we'll call it technology, human technology. And what we have is we have 3D printers. We have things like drones. We have automation. We have, call it the semiconductor industry or whatever you want to call it. Okay. We also have what could be called solar panels and batteries. Now this is very, 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 very simple. But what you also have happening here are new materials and new fabrications, which fundamentally means new relationships. This is inevitable. The reason that this is inevitable is because we can't unmake it. The reason we can't unmake it is because now it's been created. Any landfill in the world in a few years is going to have examples of these things, and anybody who's a halfway capable version of this is going to be able to begin the same process which has led us to where we are now. This issue of industrialization, for instance, is important because it's this and this that have a relationship with what we could call finance. And I don't quite know where to put finance in here, except that finance is a form of relationship that we're used to, whether or not it's necessarily as functional as we believe it is. Now, I'm going to take this out of here for a second and put in something that's kind of important. Here, I'm going to grab this base. What we need to understand is that this is called, we'll call this technical documentation. Okay, technical documentation is essential to all of this in terms of being able to explain it to other people. All of this is going to have technical documentation. All of this is technical documentation. And so what this is it's going to just take off like you wouldn't believe, because all of this has to be explained. All of this has to be explained. All of this has to fit in to our friendly internet, okay? All of this is going to require just tons and tons and tons and tons of new versions of this. Okay, now, this issue of search. Okay, one of the things that's interesting about this is what could be called issues of, call it, navigation, okay? Navigation is essential to what human beings have to do while they're dealing with this and this and this and this. And we might as well call, this is very interesting, but we could say that technology and economy are very closely related. Meaning that language, we'll just say language is a form of technology, and language is also kind of a form of economy. Navigation. Okay, with the model that we have now in place for these mobile devices, which are becoming the primary gateway to the internet, is the one that Google offers. Google is the biggest thing going right now, but Google has some fundamental flaws. One of the fundamental flaws is that it is not taking into account actual human interaction, which is essential. Actual human interaction. There is no staff of operators that you can call at Google to correct anything. There is no way to, you're going to have all these self-driving cars, but there's no way to tell anybody that something happened because you can't reach anyone. The only people that they're interested in talking to are people selling advertising. And that is a fundamental flaw because most of these issues of finance now, or most of these issues of communication, or whatever you want to call it, have a really awful relationship with advertising. And advertising is almost essentially counterproductive to navigating this situation essentially in a way that's good for your personal well-being. Market share really doesn't have a whole lot to do with drowning in a bunch of methane water at the North Pole. Okay, now, the place that I'm going with this is search is essentially going to need to transform. And it's going to transform incredibly quickly. So the model that I want to use for this is easy to understand. I don't have a place to put it, unfortunately. I need a place to put this in here somewhere. I don't want to use this corner quite yet. We'll put it right here. I use this in 4 years or less, and this looks a little bit tiny. In fact, it's too tiny. It's too bad. We'll put it in the middle of. We'll put it in the middle of this somewhere. We'll put it in Hudson Bay. That's where we'll put it. We'll put it in the middle of Hudson Bay. Okay. In the land of industrialization, in the land of human behavior, we have our political state arrangements and things like that. So we just went through a management decision, which was to have Donald Trump represent the interests of the United States as the executive in charge of doing those sort of things. We'll see if that's a good idea or a bad idea. The main thing being in the next 4 years or less, if you have something that occupies this much area, and if in 18 months it's doubling, it will do this, and then this, and then this, in the space of 4 years. So this more or less becomes that. What's subject to this is all of these. These are changing. And hence, these are changing. That's all happening. This relationship, which has nothing to do really with technology on a human level, is subject to something else, which is the 1 degree difference, which can basically be quite amazing. If you have boiling water, the degree below boiling water, it's not boiling. And if you have freezing water, a degree above freezing, it's not freezing. So what's happening here, and its issue of inevitability, which has been discussed for a while now, is now on its way. And so we have this situation happening as an inevitable topic of interest. Now, it doesn't really matter whether you agree with me or you don't, because nothing that I've put on this board really is arguable. It's been proven, and it's happening, and I might be a little bit crude and a little bit primitive about how I'm putting this forward, but this is essentially what's going on. And this is essentially the parameters of how much space we have around our ability to do anything while we still have a fairly, how would we put it? A fairly, essentially well-ordered economy, that's where we are. I mean, we're not having anything that bad happening yet. Okay, but this is all going on. Now, we're back to this, new logistics search, technical documentation, and inevitable topics of interest. And where I step in with these things. What is this supposed to do? This construction that I'm making. Well, if I have inevitable topics of interest, I have inevitable issues, and we won't call them popularity, because popularity is kind of the wrong word for it. That's why I prefer interest to popularity. Popular is, it'll all go away. Popular is something else. But issues of reality are issues of essentially interest sooner or later. So, what I'm saying is that the old model, the Google model, is essentially obsolete because it's going the opposite direction. What that means is that you're creating a vacuum of necessity, because what has to happen now, and what will probably happen, is a form of wiki. Okay? Now, I am not a tech guy past a certain point, but I do know that Wikipedia is a very nice model for handling certain things. This wiki that I'm discussing here may or may not be an inevitability, but the fundamental issue here is a form of what could be called quality control. So quality control is really important, okay? Quality control. In this issue of spam in this issue of viruses, in this issue of fake news and so many other things, the issue of quality control, while we're attempting to do this issue of navigation with essentially the inevitable, is going to become a very interesting relationship between, I'll just call this a cooperative community, because essentially language creates a cooperative economy. We all understand what we believe we understand each other to be saying. So this issue of new logistics, this issue of search may or may not become a wiki, but I think that that's an interesting idea. The issue of quality control will become one of, that's an inevitable topic of interest, okay? Quality control. Let's say that the human population is kind of, well, I hate to use the word retarded, but the human population at large seems to do stupid things over and over and over again. So let's say that we have 10 to 20%, no, 10 to 30% of the human population is really interested in this, as opposed to, say, truly fictional scenarios. Okay? Fictional scenarios are lovely, but fictional scenarios are fictional. And so in this place of all of these things, another thing is that opinion, entertaining opinion, has nothing to do with this. Entertaining opinion is, so what? And if entertaining opinion doesn't add anything to navigating this to some purpose that improves the situation as opposed to its decay, then entertaining opinion is just pointless. Now, I hate to be negative, but one of the things about permafrost here and methane is that it's flammable. And we have an issue in this logistical situation of what could be called fire prevention and other things like that. So we are faced with an issue of disarmament, okay? We cannot, and this is another issue of inevitability, we have to disarm, or else our battles, our madness, our starting these fires, whether they're nuclear or what have you, is going to lead to some real problems with what could be called flammability. Okay? And the other thing which we have is we have our lovely, what we could call Fukushima quality of Fukushima solar flares, meaning that just as that 100-foot tidal wave hit that 50-foot wall, and it was inadequate, we have the same issue with solar flares and what we could call the grid. This is going to happen. All right, now, what do we have? We have this. We have this to discuss. We have this to discuss now on our mobile devices, and we have this to discuss with this. Now, what is this? This is called, we'll call this, for as long as it lasts, a viable economy. Okay? And viable means that for as long as it lasts, I may be able to make a living discussing these things, which I'm doing right now. If this goes too far, all of these qualities, then this is going to be a different situation, and we will not be able to discuss this in terms of viable economy. My opinion is we're back to new logistic search, and inevitable topics of interest is that from now on, while we can, this is something to pay attention to. And that's about it. Thank you very much.